You're going to hear a little bit of noise here probably in the background. That's because I have a puppy that is, and he is a handful.
Oh, yeah. Tiny puppies they're cute, but yeah, they're definitely a handful.
We bought this dog. It was a Beagle mix. My girls like small dogs, so we got this Beagle mix. And
don't lie, you like small dogs.
I like small dogs. I like to be able to cuddle with them. But one of the things I don't think they planned on was the other part of the mix, which I'm pretty sure is either a Black Lab or a Rottweiler.
Funny enough, we did, they have like 23andMe for people. Lily did like a 23andMe thing for our dog, and we found out she's like predominantly pit bull. But if you look at her, you would never know. She looks like a German Shepherd. It's I forget everything, but it was like pit bull, like blue heeler, like Rottweiler was in there. Basically all the dogs that are just complete menaces. Like she has a little bit of that in her, but I mean she's still a sweetie. You would never tell.
Macy had a pit bull, and my veterinarian actually has a pit bull.
They're the best.
They claim that
I love pit bulls.
Yeah, fantastic dogs.
Yeah. Yep. I've known people that have had pit bulls, and they're the sweetest dogs in the world.
Probably more just like people, right? Probably more a indication of the people raising them.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's there is something to be said about like just temperament of the dog. Like some dogs just have specific temperaments, not even necessarily breeds. But like, so we picked Eva, that's our dog. We picked her out of a litter, and like all of the dogs have different personalities, and you can kind of tell what kind of dog they're going to be even when they're a tiny puppy.
Yep, a lot of fun, a lot of work, and then in the end they break your heart. But I keep coming back to them. There's nothing better than a dog.
Yeah, they're the best.
So getting on to dynamic growth here. One of the things we didn't do this year was make predictions. I'm just curious, if somebody said, Derek, I got $1,000 here that's yours. If you guess, is the S&P 500 higher or lower on December 31st of this year?
I think it's going to depend on, well, I know this is the cop-out answer. It's going to depend on a lot of different stuff. It's going to be hard to predict. I think, so going off my gut reaction, there's a lot of things that would have to come into play, but I think the driving force is going to be if inflation continues to break down at the clip that it's breaking down. I think just by the kind of stuff that I'm seeing with growth, it's finally starting to slow a little bit. We're kind of starting to see the growth depreciate a little bit. The labor market's probably going to get tighter just due to Fed tightening, and earnings are probably going to get constricted. So I think that we're probably going to finish lower. But I think that the first half of the year, we probably have a lot of room to run here.
If we look at history, just looking at the odds of two back-to-back years of down, the odds are stacked against you to have two years back-to-back that are down. I think the last time we did it was the dot-com bubble, so around 2000. We actually had 3 down years at that period of time. So sometimes I look at those back tests and they disgust me, because 12 months is long enough for getting statements that show a declining market. But I'm actually on the optimistic side. I think that the market will finish higher from here. I do think that if I just saw a poll that said something like 63% of economists say that we are likely to have a recession sometime in 2023. And everything we have talked about on this podcast would indicate, yes, that's true. We talked about some mixed bags last episode, I should say, how we have a labor market that looks very, very strong. The last unemployment number came out at 3.5%. But one thing that might skew that a bit is the number of Americans who have multiple jobs is near a record high for that. So that might be playing into some of it. And we are starting to see the trickling of, as you mentioned.
Sorry, I don't believe that I don't think the unemployment rate counts people that have multiple jobs. I believe the unemployment rate, this is my understanding, I could be wrong about this, is the amount of people that are looking for a job that have a job. I don't think the people get double counted in that number.
Okay, fair enough. The other thing that I think we're going to see, though, is a trickling down of unemployment numbers. You're looking at the tech companies right now, right? Mm-hmm. I just saw a text come in from you that saw Google was laying off quite a bit of people.
12,000.
Microsoft is laying off. Yeah. Amazon is laying off. I mean, we're seeing these larger corporations begin to lay people off. You're seeing the banks do it as well. And as we've stated before, it really depends on what industry you're in, because if you're in the construction industry right now, you've got more work than you can get to. So, I could see this as kind of a rolling recession, if we want to call that, where maybe it affects different industries at different periods of time.
I think that's probably the most likely outcome. I think that the severity of it is kind of the thing that's up in the air still. I think that I'm pretty confident that we're going to at least go through some sort of economic slowdown, and then to the extent of which, like how broad it is, affecting like every single industry. I don't know if it's going to be something like that, and I definitely don't think it's going to be like a 2008 recession type thing. You could argue that asset prices are inflated still, but it's not something systemically wrong with the economy that like what was wrong in 2008, that were like the global economy was on the brink of total collapse. I don't think we're there because I guess, I mean, hindsight would be 2020. Like while you were going through the 2008 recession, it wasn't abundantly clear that there was like all this fraud in the system. So
but you saw banks closing down, and you saw saw foreclosures like crazy, and just it was a period of time. I mean, because I went through this as an investor, and it was a period of time where, they always say you ride the downturn out, right? Ride it out, it'll come back. There was a period of time where you weren't sure if this was going to come back or not, because things were pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, as I look at things now, I unless we uncover something that is systemically wrong, I don't think that it's going to be anything catastrophic, but I think that the probability that we go through a slowdown is pretty high, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I still think we finished the year higher than what we are right now. So we'll see where we're at.
One thing that's interesting about that, if you look at the banks, like all the investment banks, their prediction for the S&P, I think most of them have it over 4,000, which would be up from where we started the year and up from where we are right now. But at the same time, all of these investment banks are laying off thousands of employees, so they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth a little bit. I don't know. I mean, they're in the business of hedging risks too. Like there's a probability that it ends up at 4,500, the S&P ends up at 4,500, and there's also a probability that we go through a pretty deep recession. So like you have to prepare for both scenarios if you're going to manage risk.
So there's a lot of factors that influence the economy. And if we just pay attention to one factor, we could make a prediction or we could make an assumption, and that assumption could be wrong because there could be other factors that affect it. So my question to you is, if I look at the speed at which interest rates were raised, and if I look at the yield curve, that would lead me to believe that we're heading into a fairly substantial economic slowdown. But does the fact that we're seeing China's economy come out of its slumber, or at least that's the talk, that it's coming out of its slumber, is that going to be a catalyst that potentially either saves it or creates a very, very mild recession?
Yeah, it could definitely mitigate the effects for the economy, but it would still, like, you could still make the case that asset prices wouldn't do great during that time period, because asset prices are largely driven by like the strength of the U.S. dollar, or like whatever the Fed's doing with monetary policy. Asset prices are so correlated to those two things that if China reopened and did like a crazy high level of stimulus, they could help the actual underlying economy, but you could also make the argument that the asset prices wouldn't respond positively. Not that they would respond negatively to the stimulus, but just that it wouldn't be enough to impact the S&P 500, for instance.
I wanted to talk today about some changes to the Secure Act, and that's probably not the most exciting topic that we could potentially talk about. So let's hit yours first before we lose a lot of people. I think what I'm going to talk about is important, especially if you are a saver, an investor. But let's get to something that has maybe a little bit more meat to it.
Okay, so just with China, I think that it's interesting. Just wanted to touch on that a little bit more. I think that there is an opportunity. I mean, if you look at Chinese tech stocks, like I was just looking before we hopped on the podcast, Alibaba was up like 40% in the past month. So there is, like, investors are aggressively allocating to the fact that China might do some pretty substantial stimulus. And I think that will definitely help the global economy, because you think like all of the most of the manufacturing comes from places like China. So And then a part of the inflationary narrative, not all of it, but part of it was the supply chain bottlenecks. If they completely go gung ho and completely open up at full head of steam, that's definitely going to alleviate a lot of the problems that face the global economy.
Which would also, you would think, help inflation as well.
Yeah, right. So I mean, it would definitely not hurt. Another thing that investors will probably start to take a look at is so in 2022, one of the best performing assets was the U.S. dollar relative to other currencies. So there's you can look up UUP or DXY. That you can kind of see the dollar chart. Investors are aggressively pricing in the strength of the euro and the strength of the Japanese yen relative to the U.S. dollar. So if you look at the UUP chart or the DXY chart, it peaked out and then it's kind of been on a downward trajectory ever since. So investors are heavily pricing in the prospects that Europe, Japan, and not necessarily China, but they'll be tighter on monetary policy than the Fed will be. And I think that there's an opportunity there because if you look at who has more room to tighten, I think that the Fed probably has more room to tighten. And if you look at China, if they do this massive stimulus, that would also be bullish for the U.S. dollar relative to the Chinese currency, just because the Fed would have tighter monetary policy than the Chinese, which could be a potential catalyst for the U.S. dollar that's gotten beat up since its peak last year.
It seems like we've been talking about China coming out of lockdown for a while, and that was one of the reasons why, one of the reasons why we had energy and oil as part of our portfolio. Is the world's second largest economy is going to need some energy if it is indeed coming out of its zero COVID lockdown.
We've had the USO position for a couple months now in anticipation of this being one of the major catalysts for USO, and then also the United States eventually having to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Those two things would be a positive catalyst for oil.
Do you pay a lot of attention to the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you had any opinions. I only see the sound bites coming from Twitter, and I mean, some of the stuff is just bananas. But it seems like the consensus is we're no longer going to have cars. So if you have a car, I don't know what that means. If you should go ahead and sell it or whatever, I don't even know what that means. But that seems to be the dominant narrative. That and the dietary changes that we'll probably go through, where people are going to consume way less meat and dairy. Those are my two main takeaways.
So my opinion, and maybe I'm completely wrong on this, the World Economic Forum has, in many cases, at least in my mind, become a side circus, like a sideshow, where some of the things, so they've got a goal of eliminating privately owned vehicles by 2030. I am hopeful that there is enough freedom-loving people out there in the world that they don't willingly give up their rights to own a transport vehicle. Imagine, Derek, if the vehicles were owned by the state or owned by some corporation, and you have to ask permission to use them, right? They could be taken away from you at any point in time if that was the case. Or, you as an individual are no longer able to consume more than 2,500 calories because maybe we're in a situation where, Macy was asking me that question. Well, how would they determine that? Well, if you look at what's happening in China, they actually have government officials delivering food to homes, right? So if that was the case, they could. This almost sounds like George Orwell to me, where they're delivering food to you that is a certain calorie amount, and I'm sure there would be situations where number one, I don't believe this is going to happen. I would see rebellion happening where all of a sudden I'm having cows in my backyard and I've turned my yard into a field so that I can have more crops. Like, I would determine my own fate in that instance, and I would not allow the government to determine how many calories my family could consume. And I would get a bike. I would get something. I would have private transportation. I mean, that's why I think it's a sideshow.
Yeah, I think that a lot of these goals are pretty lofty. I think that the no combustion engine vehicles by 2030, you're going to get hit in the face with the reality pretty hard. We literally just can't pull minerals out of the earth fast enough to make that possible. It's just not going to happen. So I think that you can have all these goals, and I think that people are going to, one, the tech has to be a lot better. because I mean, a lot of people are talking. I'm pretty bullish on Tesla. I think that the tech's pretty cool. I've seen a lot of the stuff that those cars can do. They're pretty awesome. But a lot of people talk about how, like a lot of users of the car talk about how, in the winter the performance like dramatically decreases and that they don't hold charge very well. It's the same thing with, I mean, if you leave your phone in your car in the winter,
Sure.
like your battery's going to be dead and it's going to like potentially cause some damage to the phone. So, and then the same thing with the changes in consumption on like in food consumption. I think that there's probably a certain amount of people that, I mean, if you're vegan or something like that, it's not going to be a huge change for you. But the I don't see, because it's the same discussion with like the gas stoves things. It's too decentralized. Like, how can you determine if somebody has, like, you're gonna go to every person's house and be like, oh, you have chickens in your backyard? Like, it's too easy to be decentralized for them to be able to stop it outright. But I mean, their attempt might be just to dramatically cut back on that stuff.
Yeah.
Or dramatically cut back on the access to that stuff.
So if you ever travel down, any major highway right now, one of the things that always stands out is the number of semis that are on the road right now. And I think whether it's the online purchasing of things or whatever, but it just seems like, I mean, I travel down 271 in Ohio and 71 several times a week going to the office. By 2030, are we at a point where we can replace the semis with battery-powered semis at this point in time? I don't think we are. So I think, aren't they having problems right now with the semi?
Yeah, I don't. I believe there was one of the issues with the Tesla semis. Maybe I don't know enough about it to make a claim like that or anything. But I thought I was hearing something about that. But I think that if you think about like a utopian model where, I mean, everyone takes Ubers that are autonomous vehicles, like there's no driver of the car and you just get picked up by your Uber to go wherever you want to go. I think that's kind of the goal. So you wouldn't need as many cars on the road, I guess, is the utopian view. But I think that your point about like you need your own mode of transportation that you can get from point A to point B that you don't have to ask permission for. I think that's I don't know how many people would have a problem with that. I would definitely have a problem with that, and I definitely wouldn't accept that just like on its face. Like, I mean, we could have the discussion when the proposal actually gets rolled out, but as it stands, that sounds like a proposal that's completely unacceptable to me. And same thing with the food consumption. Like, I actually consume a lot of meat, like when I'm working out and stuff or trying to bulk up, and it's very nutritious too. Like eggs are basically nature's multivitamins. So if you're going to tell people that they can't eat that type of stuff, that's just completely unacceptable to me.
My mind, I'm in 100% agreement with you. You know what my mind gravitates towards when I hear no privately owned vehicles? I'm picturing in my mind Mount St. Helens event, a forest fire, hurricane, and you're ordered to evacuate the city, right? So you're calling for an Uber
right.
To come get you so that you can take away, but nobody's answering.
Yeah.
So I think you definitely want your own car.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you got to have the comedian Bill Burr has a great joke about that. He took helicopter lessons, and he's like a licensed helicopter pilot because he watched zombie apocalypse movies. He goes, the helicopter's the best like GTFO vehicle, where you can just like
sure.
like you don't have to get like clogged up on the 405 or whatever. Like you can just go straight up and then out.
Yep. No, I mean, I agree. I think they misunderstand. I'm hopeful that they underestimate the urge for just individuality, sovereignness with our own selves. So,
yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting to me is like the public backlash. Like, so many people have written books. So many people are very vocal against the World Economic Forum and a lot of these like globalist groups, essentially. And it seems like it's becoming a point where these people that are going to Davos and saying all this stuff in public are becoming more guarded and not as vocal with this stuff. Because you saw like Bill Gates is one of the biggest proponents of this stuff. George Soros is another one. And they both skipped out like at the last moment. They said they weren't attending the World Economic Forum. So I think that at least part of that decision making, I think, is just how I mean, how much those two especially get the most crap on like the conspiracy theory front. And I'm not saying any of that stuff is like misguided. It does definitely there's room for suspicion there. I would say that, but like it seems like the public backlash is getting a lot stronger with these people that fly their private jets to Davos to tell you that you can't have a car because it uses too much gas. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean about the sideshow. I mean, they fly their private jets there, and the wild parties that they have, and the consumption that's going on during those days.
And then they tell you to eat bugs.
Right, yeah, and it's almost like my view of it is almost like a farmer would view his or her crops or cattle or something like that. That's kind of how they look at the rest of the population of the world. And I think, at least in my opinion, every time I see it, I just it disgusts me a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Their actions, right? So, do you mind if I get into the Secure Act 2.0?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Secure Act 2.0, which is the acronym for Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. Sometimes I wonder how long they spend on actually naming these things. Right? They've got to put a committee in charge of putting that together, right?
Yeah, right. They hire like these PR firms to try to come up with the name of these acts. What the best one was the Inflation Reduction Act. That probably was like, bam, that took 2 seconds.
What should we call it? I got it.
Yeah.
So the Secure Act 2.0 is an extension of the Secure Act 1.0. The Secure Act 2.0 was passed in the recent government spending bill. There's about 400 pages that make it up. And it actually has some interesting stuff in it that affects everyday Americans. Three of the ones that jump out at me is that I would see on a day-to-day basis with our practice is, one, is pushing the required minimum distribution age for IRAs to 73, effective January 1st of 2023. It's being pushed back from 72 to 73. That's the one I want to get into today. But in addition to that, maybe we tackle this one down the road. It gets into 529 plans. 529 plans are college savings plans. And these were always hard for me. I own college savings plans for my daughters, and I stopped contributing to them. I still have them, but I stopped adding to them when they got to be 5, 6, 7 years old. And the reason for that is as they developed a personality, I began to wonder if all three of my daughters were going to go to a 4-year school. And that 529 plan doesn't have to be used for a 4-year school. But my point is, do I need the funds? Do I want to earmark those funds for education if there's a chance they may graduate from high school and start a business, go to a trade school, do something else that maybe doesn't require as much funds? And so for my peace of mind, I started saving for them just in a individual retirement account. I did a UTMA account for them. You wouldn't have to. You could open it up in your own name. But that way, I don't have the tax benefit of having the tax-free use of it if it is used for education. But when you look at the typical college savings plan that a parent is using, they're not putting $1,000 a month into that thing. They are, putting birthday money. They're putting $50 here, $100 there. And in my mind, the tax savings is not enough to justify the pigeonhole that takes place with the use of that money. So the one thing, and then the question would be, well, what if you saved in a 529 plan and the child got a scholarship or the child didn't go to school? What do I do with the money? Because if I use it for something other than education, then I've got that 10% penalty that comes from that. Well, one of the things that the Secure Act addressed with that problem is if your child has a 529 plan and let's say it gets a scholarship and you don't need all the money within that 529 plan, you can convert that over to a Roth IRA for that child's behalf. There are a couple of kind of stipulations that need to be in place for that to happen, but for the most part, you would be at some point in time you would be able to do that for the child, to convert that over to a Roth IRA, and then it continues on for the child as a retirement account, which is fantastic. I mean, if you watch the beauty of a Roth IRA compounding for 40 years without being taxed and then being able to pull it out tax-free, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, imagine if you just didn't tell them that they had this. And
that's really what you probably want to do, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I mean, at some point in time, you'd have to tell them because you would risk you dying and they not knowing about it. But
right, yeah. I mean, you don't want to be if it is a retirement account, then yeah, you would want it to be in a position where they reach a certain age and they're like, oh my God, I'm a multi-millionaire because of a couple $1,000 when I was 10 years old or whatever.
Yeah. Two other things that might be nothing burgers. One is they, looking at polls that they had or research that they had, they saw that the average American, if they encounter a $400 unexpected expense, they don't have the funds available to pay for that. So they're having to pull from their 401k accounts and take that penalty, or they have to put it on a credit card and go into debt. So the new rule says that you can pull $1,000 from your 401k if it's for unexpected emergencies, and you do not pay the penalty on that if that's the case. Now, and you can do it again. You can do it more than once, but to do it a second time without a penalty, you have to pay it back, and it's within a 3-year period. So why I say that's a nothing burger is, number one, I question the ability of the person to pay it back if they don't have it in the first place. And so, yes, they could pay it back over time very, very slowly. That's the case. But remember, you're talking about somebody that's already strapped for cash, right? If somebody's living paycheck to paycheck, that means they actually don't have anything left over at the end of that paycheck to pay towards that. So I question that.
Or I was just going to say, or it was if somebody is not living paycheck to paycheck, but they had a 401k, it was a big enough expense where they didn't have enough savings to cover it. They had to dip into retirement. So that's a pretty big expense. Yeah,
exactly. And then there was another one. I just had it in my mind, but I can't remember it. Anyways, we'll get to that. We're going to dive into some more things here with the Secure Act. But today I wanted to talk about the pushing back the required minimum distribution age. So this is interesting to me because one of the arguments for pushing it back, Derek, is that people are working longer and people are living longer, right? So what the required minimum distribution is, for those who don't know, is if I have, my candle just blew up. If I have an IRA, if I have an IRA, I'm not smoking anything here, guys. If I have an IRA, traditional IRA, I can put money into it and it can grow deferred without being taxed. It's taxed when I pull it out. Now, at some point in time, what the government doesn't want is you to put money in that IRA and then live your whole life and then never pay tax on it. You'd pass it on to a beneficiary. They would pay tax on it. But they want to start milking that tax revenue stream, right? So it had been prior to COVID, prior to 2019, it had been 70.5. So the required minimum distribution age was 70.5, which meant that they use a life expectancy table and they calculate your age, and then they look at your account value based on the end of the year, and they tell you how much you need to pull from that account. The penalties for missing that distribution were terrible. It was 50% of what you should have taken out of that account. So you definitely did not want to miss that event. After COVID, one of the things they did was, through the Secure Act, the original one, is if you remember in 2019, 2020, I can't remember exactly which one it was, they suspended the requirement to take a distribution from that account. So they said for that year, you don't have to take an RMD. Then they started up again and they pushed the age back to 72. So we can wait a little bit longer here before we have to pull that out. Because the argument was that you had people who were still working when they were 70.5, and they were active savers, but they were being forced to pull from that IRA, which was increasing their tax bracket, right? And so now they had a choice of, well, maybe I don't work because I have to pull this income anyway. So now I'm being double taxed on the income that I'm pulling out. So the thought was that I'm going to delay having that pull that required minimum distribution out to 72.5. Now it's pushed to 73. So the question that I would ask is, who does that ultimately help? You and I are in the business of helping wealthy people. And if they are not wealthy, our goal is to get them wealthy. And that's our stated goal, right? We love money. We think money's a wonderful thing. We want people to have it. We want people to have plenty of it, as much as they want. We want them to be able to chase their goals and live the life they want to live. And while money is not the solution to everything, it sure is a means to an end, right? If I want to have a certain way of life. So the Secure Act 2.0 pushes it back in January 1st of 2023 to 73. And by 2033, it'll push it back to age 75. So the question that I'm asking is, if the average American can't come up with $400 for an emergency expense, the average American is also probably not waiting till 73 in order to start taking distributions from their IRA, I'm guessing, right? So you would argue, the question is, does this help only wealthy Americans? So we have clients, Derek, who take RMDs from their IRAs. They've done a nice job savings, but they're living below their means, and they don't need that IRA. They don't need the income from that IRA. So what they end up doing is taking it, making a donation, taking it, reinvesting it in a non-qualified account, something that allows them to, because they're not consuming it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So pushing back, are we simply delaying the tax on wealthier Americans by pushing that back? Does it really help the average American? I don't know if it does.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. I mean, I was thinking of a counterexample, but I think, yeah, if you're in a position where you're 73 and you're excited about this news, where you're like, oh, I don't have to take a RMD until I'm 75. Like, I think I can't think of a position you would be in where you're like at median income or below median income where that would help you. I don't know. Could you think of one?
No, I don't. I think it does favor wealthy Americans. I am not against wealthy Americans. I just, this thing was, getting back to the name of the account, setting every community up for retirement enhancement. I think you are setting some people up for retirement enhancement.
Which community?
Right, exactly. Which community? The other thing is, does this really save tax? And we'll see. Because remember, the distribution, your RMD is calculated by the value of your account as of December 31st of the previous year. So, and it's based on the life expectancy tables. So they essentially calculate how much more you have to live based on expectation, and they come up with an equation that says, okay, you need to start taking that up. If I delay it from 72 to 73, that didn't change my life expectancy. Mm-hmm. So that just means that at 73, I'm going to have to pull a little bit more out than I would have had I started at 72. So we're delaying it a year and maybe moving that person closer towards death, that they had a year where they didn't take it out. But again, I don't know how much it favors the average American as it does maybe somebody who's a little bit well off.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's not a bad idea to, like, because I mean, people are living longer. It's not a bad idea to push that out a little bit. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much my only insight there is I don't think that it's necessarily a bad idea to do something like that. But yeah, I don't think it necessarily helps like the average person. But at the same time, if you look at like net worth by age group, the average net worth goes up dramatically once you're in your like 60s and 70s, because I mean you're earning more. Like when you're 20, you're not going to be earning as much as when you're 50, or at least I hope not, because I mean that would be
hopefully you've become more valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because when you're 20, you're an idiot like me.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think that's the case. I just think that we talked about AI, right? Like you look at the speed.
I agree. No, I was agreeing with you. I was just making a joke, but yeah, I agree that you're much more valuable to the workforce when you're 40, 50, and have 20 years of experience. That's not a controversial statement, I don't think.
Yeah, that's what you find out as an investor, right? Every time you go through a down cycle, or every time you make a trade and blow it, you become a better investor because you've learned from. Hopefully, you've picked that up and you've got another feather in your cap, and you don't make that mistake again, and you're able to capitalize on the next opportunity that comes along.
And just the intangibles of better social skills, like you're better, like more people, better networking, so you can get in better positions, stuff like that too. Like it's not just you're better at your job, you're just more efficient at work. You know how to manage your time more effectively because you probably have more balls up in the air with kids and stuff like that, mortgage payments and stuff.
Yeah, and you've seen things don't fluster you as much because you've seen it and made it through. But
yeah, for sure. Shout out to the 50-year-olds out there.
All right. One thing though that I think that it does change is maybe a little bit is, there always has been, as somebody approaches retirement, the question is sometimes is, should I convert my traditional IRA over to a Roth IRA? And what that is you have the ability, if I have a traditional IRA, I could convert that to a Roth IRA, most people. And all I simply do is I take my account value and then I pay the tax on it. And then it transfers over to a Roth IRA, and then that going forward then would be tax-free growth, and it could be withdrawn tax-free, and it could be passed tax-free onto your beneficiary. And in most cases, if you just look at the numbers, it makes sense to do that. Mm-hmm. Hard to do because let me give you an example. Let's say that we have a 73-year-old, Derek. So somebody who is turning 73 in 2023, and they've got $500,000 in a traditional IRA. They could convert that to a Roth IRA. If they're converting the entire $500,000 to a Roth IRA, they're going to pay about if you look at the tax bracket, they're going to pay about $175,000 in federal tax on that right away. Boom. And so for the most people, that tax bill makes them shy away. And they say, well, I'll continue the traditional IRA and I'll just, bleed that tax over time as I take withdrawals. But I kind of ran the numbers here. And what I looked at was, I'm 73 years old. I've got a $500,000 IRA. I'm to the point now where I'm going to have to start taking required minimum distributions from that account. Or I convert it to a Roth IRA, which would eliminate the need to take RMDs from that account. And so I ran it to age 80. So I'm assuming that I'm 73 and I'm going to pass away at age 80. So if I had a $500,000 account, and what I did is I assumed the return I was getting was a compounding growth rate of 6%. Mm-hmm. So a moderate account maybe, right? Which would probably be appropriate for somebody who's at that age, right? And so my first year, my RMD is somewhere around 19,000. It's creeping up over the years to 20,000. It goes to 21,000. By the last year, age 79, I don't actually take a withdrawal on 80 because I pass away. I'm around 24,000 that I'm pulling from that account. So I would have paid roughly 150,000 in taxes over that time. I paid 175 to convert it. If mm-hmm. I took the RMDs, I only paid roughly 150,000. Now this is federal tax. But here's the difference. If I would have converted my IRA to a Roth IRA at age 73, paid the 175,000 in taxes, and then that too continued to grow at 6%, I would be able to pass a tax-free $488,000 on to my beneficiaries. Whereas if you're passing that IRA onto your beneficiaries at the end of your 80th year, they are going to now have to, they take a lump sum, they're going to have to pay taxes on that. So they're going to have to pay about $220,000 in tax at that time. So when you look at it on paper, you actually save, assuming that that scenario held true and you had a 6% return, you save over $100,000 in taxes by converting it to a Roth IRA if you were looking at a multiple generation type thing.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, is if that's assuming that you don't actually need the required minimum distributions, right?
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, that's correct. You're not pulling from your Roth IRA. You're just letting it go, right? In the other case, you're being forced to. So one of the reasons I think this maybe changes those conversions a little bit by pushing the retirement age back to 73, and again, by 2033, it'll be 75, is I think a lot of people are going to look at that and say, oh, I'm not worried about the taxes for my beneficiaries. They can take care of that. I'm worried about the taxes for myself. And I think you have less people converting it over to a Roth and just trickling that tax, over a period of time.
Yeah, I think it's just, it's just different objectives. I don't think either way is bad, but I mean, if you're like super high net worth individual and you have an IRA with 500, like your example, 500,000, like if that was a smaller piece of the overall assets, then yeah, like why would you be concerned about your own tax burden when you have all these assets elsewhere? But I don't think there's anything wrong either way. Like I just think it's whatever you want to do with the money. It's your money,
Yep. And the flaw in this instance, well, obviously it's got to hold true, which life necessarily doesn't hold true. That assumes no tax rate increases or anything like that. But it also assumes that I'm converting it at age 73 at the time when I need to take an RMD from the account. Had I converted that earlier at 60 or 65, chances are that Roth IRA would have blown through it because it would have had longer time to compound. So converting it earlier probably makes sense if you're going to do that. But if you're later in life and you're kind of testing the waters, kicking it around, thinking, should I do that? I think you're going to have more people say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, Derek, anything else to add for our listeners?
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the podcast. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. Subscribe to the newsletter by going to crosbyadvisory.com/contact. Follow us on social media channels at Crosby Advisory, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Please remember that Crosby Advisory is a registered investment advisor in the state of Ohio, Texas, and Florida. At any time, you can request our forms ADV 2A and 2B, which go into the business practices and qualifications of Crosby Advisory. Today on the show, Derek and I mentioned specific securities. That is not a recommendation for you to buy them or sell them. Do your own homework and make sure they are suitable for you. Keep in mind, investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal, and you should carefully consider all risks and fees before making an investment.